Hey there, Lorenzo here. In this video I will show you how to create a simple web server using Python and how to deploy it using AWS. Ready? Let's go. Here we're looking at the source code and we have only two HTML files. If we look at those in a browser, this is how the 404 page looks. And if I change this to the hello world file, this is very simple. But we will see that the ideas behind this are very important and always the same. So those are the two documents that we have. And this is the source code for the server. We are going to start by looking at by using localhost to test this locally, and then we will deploy it to AWS. Looking at the code, we have the IP address, the port number. We are creating the socket, we are using the socket API. We are creating a TCP socket, and then we are binding that to the IP and the port. And then simply we are listening for incoming connections. The server will hang in there waiting for connections, and once it gets an incoming connection, it will print that client address. Whoever is making that request, we will get to see the IP address. So let's take a look at that. Let's launch the server. Python server py. So right now the server is active. We can open our browser and then we need to select the port. So what we are doing here, if we take a look at that, once we get a connection, we are receiving that request and we are simply printing that. So here we can see a very basic HTTP request, a GET request in this case. And if we go back at the reference material that I have here, this is how a sample request looks like. We have the method get, we have the document that we are requesting. In this case, we didn't pass anything, but if we were to do that, so if I were to here do my document HTML, we will see that we see that document in the request. And then we have a bunch of key value pairs with different header names, and those are to provide more information on what the client wants, the language, whether we want to keep the connection alive or not, much more details. But for this tutorial we don't really need to care about those. We will just focus on the very first part, the get and whatever document we are requesting. When we are looking at the response, the protocol says that the response must start with HTTP, with the version of HTTP, a status code 200, which in this case means that everything went okay, and then a message that follows that status code. And then we will have again a bunch of header and values. So that's how the request look like. So now what we need to do is process that request. And for that, I will use a helper function. So let me uncomment that, and I'm going to print this. So if we take a look at this function, so it will split. Again, what we are after is getting that file name. So this will split the request, and by selecting one, we are going to get whatever comes after the get. and then we do some string manipulation and we'll get the file name. And we're going to do a very simple query. If that file name exists in our directory, we will return a 200, and then we will read the hello world file. If that file doesn't exist in our directory, we'll get a 404. And if we take a look at the return, we are either returning this or this right here. This is exactly what the protocol says. The HTTP version, the status code, a message. Then we have, this is just to go on to the next line. This is again part of the protocol. And then we are saying that the content type of the response document is HTML. And finally, we have the body being the contents of the HTML. So now what I will do is print the response right here, so we can see exactly how this looks, and then we're going to send the response back to the client. So let's say that, let me start a new terminal, I'll close that, so simple web server, and now I will start the server again. We are listening to the server, that's good. So let me bring this. So now if we take a look at this, we now see a 404. So let's take a look at the response. So we accepted the connection. Again, in this case we are working locally. So from my computer is import this port number at this time here in Austin, Texas. And what we are returning, we're returning HTTP 1.1, that's the version, 404, not found, the content type, and then the actual HTML from this document. So this is exactly what you see here. And now if we do hello world, we see what we expect. The hello world document. Excellent. So that is how this works locally. But now in any real life scenario, we should deploy this to the cloud because we want to be able to access this from any IP. We need to make this public. So I'm going to go ahead to AWS. This is my account, and we'll keep everything within the free tier. So I will launch, let's go to services, compute, EC2. First of all, let me kill this instance. I had one more from my previous tutorial. So let me stop that one, actions. Let me select that, this one. Terminate instance, yes. So I'm terminating that. And now we're going to go ahead and launch an instance. Let me call this my simple Python server. I'm going to select Ubuntu for the image. I'm going to keep this on micro for the free tier. Make this white, I think this is much better for this case. This is, we need this in order to use SSH. So I'm going to create a new pair. And I'm going to create that. So I will save this. So when it comes to the network settings, we need to allow SSH from anywhere. And I will show you this later, but we will need to change this. So configure storage, that's fine, and advanced details, that's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the instance. Excellent, so that's already there. So let me close that. So we need to do a couple of things. Let me go to the instance. Here we have the public IP address, the private one. So we need to connect to the server using SSH, and then we need to transfer the files. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm using a Windows machine, and that makes things a little bit more tricky. With Mac and Linux, using SSH is pretty simple because you already have an SSH client installed. With Windows, you need to go ahead and install one. But I'm going to do something tricky and use a git bash terminal, and that will allow us to use SSH without needing to download anything else. So how do we connect to the server? So the command for SSH looks like this. So we have SSH-I, then we have the path to our SSH key, we have the host name and the IP address. First, we need to do something to the SSH key. And we need to make sure that that is a read-only file and that we are the only owners of that file. So let me bring this here. So here I'm looking at, let's open the files, go to properties. So I'm going to make this read-only, and then I will make sure that I'm the only owner here. Okay, that's done. So I'm going to copy the path, and then let me take a look at that. Okay, so I can change the name. And then I need to look at the IP address, this one right here. So we'll change that. And this should work. So let's see. Let's not copy that. Okay. Let's do yes. And that worked. So now we have access to the Ubuntu instance. So we can take a look now. This is the same as you would do if you have a Linux machine. So ls, we do not have any directories there. So let's make one, make dir simple web server. And now we do ls, we see that. So let me open another git bash terminal. And now what we want to do is transfer files between my computer and that server. And for that we are going to use the scp command. How that looks is as follows. We have scp-i. Again, we need to pass the SSH key. So I will go ahead and change that name right here. Then we are going to pass whatever file we want to pass to the server and the same host name and IP address. So I will copy that. And then we need to pass the destination path. So let me just check. So that's simple web server, simple web server. That makes sense. So yeah, let's try that. So yes, this should work. So I'm going to paste that, the file transferred, and now if we go into this directory, we see server.py. So if we wanna inspect that, we see the source code. The same as what we have in here. Excellent. So we need to repeat the same for the other files. So I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to change this to 404.html. Same name here. What? Come on. Okay, and now we wanna pass hello world. No, so I have the wrong. So it should be HTML. There we go. So I need to go in here, ls. We see that we need to remove this file, so I will go remove hello world.py. Now ls. Okay, so that's good. So if we go back into the source code, what we need to do here, we need to change the IP address of the server and the port number. So when it comes to HTTP, by convention, we use port 80. And the IP address, we're going to get that from our instance detail. And now we have two IP addresses, the public and the private one. When it comes to the server only understands the private one. So let's get that. So I'm going to save this. Let me kill this terminal. So port 80 and this IP address. So I will remove this print statement. And now we will need to do the transfer again. So I will transfer this one again. And if we now take a look at the contents, cat server py, we see that the IP changed. So that's good. So let's test this. So if we go into here, let's start the server. So let me clear this and let's do Python 3 server py. We need to go in here, we need to go into security, and we need to allow that. So let's go in here. We need to edit the inbound rules. We need to add a rule, and this will be for HTTP. We see that we get port 80, that makes sense, and we wanna allow that from anywhere. So that's created now. So let's see again now. So let's do Python 3 server.py, and now we have the server listening. So let's try to connect to that. So we are, see, I was about to make a mistake. So now we need to use the public IP. So I will do this, and if we try to connect, we get, as we expected, a 404 error. Why? Because we are not passing the hello world document. But now if we look at this, we in fact get the HTML document that we want. And we can now inspect what the server is doing. So we are accepting connections from, and this is the IP address of my computer. So everything is working as expected. So in this very simple example, we were able to create a simple web server using Python. What we used was the socket API, and then we tested the server locally, and then we deployed it to AWS. When it comes to AWS, the thing that we need to consider and emphasize is this difference between the private address and the public IP address. This is what we as the client will use, and this is what the server will understand. I hope you enjoyed the video and stay tuned for more. Thank you.